What would you do if the woman scrubbing your bathroom floor turned out to hold the one secret that could save your entire company? Emeka didn't know it yet, but by the end of this story, that question would nearly cost him everything he loved. In a small farming settlement called Adaeze, 3 hours outside Owerri, the sun rose the same way it had for 100 years, slow, orange, and indifferent to the struggles of the people beneath it. It was in this quiet village that Amara Chukwu washed her son's school uniform in a plastic bucket, humming an old church song her mother had taught her, one she used to sing before sickness took the strength from her voice. Amara was 26. She had already buried a husband, raised a 5-year-old son named Kelechi almost single-handedly, and nursed a mother whose kidneys were failing faster than any hospital in the village could afford to treat. Her hands were rough. Her palms had calluses from farm work. But her eyes still held something stubborn, something that refused to accept that her story would end in that village. Every morning, she walked 2 kilometers to sell akara by the roadside. Every evening, she counted coins under a lantern, subtracting hospital costs from what she had, and always arriving at 0. Then, one Thursday, a black SUV that did not belong in Adaeze rolled slowly into the village, kicking up dust that made children run alongside it, laughing and touching its clean, gleaming body as if it were a spaceship. Inside that car sat a man named Emeka Aniekwe, 34 years old, a real estate and logistics magnate whose companies stretched from Victoria Island to Abuja. He had come to Adaeze not out of charity, but out of guilt. His construction company was clearing land nearby for a new estate, and his mother, Chief Mrs. Adaeze Aniekwe, had insisted he personally inspect how the local farmers were being compensated. He did not expect that inspection to change his life. He did not expect to meet a woman selling akara by firelight who would look him directly in the eye, not with fear, not with flattery, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing to hide. "You're staring at my food, not buying it," Amara said, not smiling, simply stating a fact. Emeka laughed, the real, surprised kind of laugh he hadn't made in years. And in that laugh, something shifted, though neither of them could have named it yet. He would return to Lagos that night, but 3 weeks later, his driver would knock on Amara's door with an envelope, a bus ticket, and an offer that would change everything. What was in that envelope would end one life in this story and begin another. Stay with us. The envelope contained a modest but life-changing offer, a live-in housemaid position in Emeka's Lekki mansion, a salary 5 times what she made in a month of selling akara, and, most importantly to Amara, a promise that her mother's hospital bills at a private Lagos clinic would be covered for as long as she worked there. Amara did not sleep that night. She sat by her mother's bedside, listening to her labored breathing, and thought about Kelechi's school fees, about the dialysis machine her mother needed twice a week, about the roof that leaked every rainy season. By morning, her decision was already made, not out of excitement, but out of the quiet desperation of a woman who had run out of other options. She left Kelechi with her younger sister, Ijeoma, promising to send for him once she was settled. She kissed her mother's forehead and boarded a rickety bus to Lagos with one bag and a heart full of both hope and dread. Lagos swallowed her whole the moment she stepped off that bus. The noise, the traffic, the impossibly tall buildings glinting like knives in the afternoon sun. She had never seen anything like the Aniekwe mansion in Banana Island. White marble floors, gold-trimmed mirrors, a swimming pool shaped like a teardrop, and staff quarters larger than her entire house back home. It was there, on her very first day, that she met the woman who would make her life a quiet, daily hell, Cynthia Bello. Cynthia was Emeka's fiancée. Tall, sharp-featured, always dressed as though a camera might appear at any moment. Cynthia had grown up in Lagos high society, the daughter of a once wealthy oil executive whose fortune had collapsed years earlier, under circumstances she never discussed. She had spent a decade rebuilding a version of that lost status through her engagement to Emeka, and she guarded that position like a lioness guarding the only meal she'd eaten in weeks. The moment Cynthia saw the way Emeka's eyes lingered, just half a second too long, on the new housemaid from the village, something cold and calculating settled behind her carefully lined eyes. "You," Cynthia said, without introducing herself. "New girl, come here." Amara approached, hands folded respectfully. "Do you know what your job is in this house?" "Yes, ma," Amara answered. "To help around the house." Cynthia smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "No, your job is to be invisible." "Can you do that?" Amara swallowed the lump rising in her throat and nodded. She did not yet know how impossible that request would become. Cynthia had a reason for her cruelty that went far beyond jealousy, a reason buried in her own past that would not surface until the very end. Keep watching. The weeks that followed tested every ounce of resilience Amara had. Cynthia found endless reasons to humiliate her, spilling juice deliberately so Amara would have to clean it up on her knees in front of dinner guests, accusing her of stealing jewelry that had simply been misplaced, mocking her village accent in front of Emeka's business partners. "Say I am going to the market again." Cynthia would laugh cruelly at dinner parties. "Do it in your village accent. It's so entertaining." Amara endured it silently, sending every naira of her salary back home, video calling her son every night on a cheap phone. Emeka's driver, a warm-hearted man named Tunde, had quietly given her. Tunde became her only true friend in that house. A widower himself, he recognized in Amara the same quiet grief he carried, and often left food outside her door on the night Cynthia made her skip dinner as punishment. Emeka, for his part, was largely unaware of the worst of it. He traveled frequently for business, trusting his household staff to Cynthia's management. But slowly, he began noticing things. He noticed that Amara never complained. He noticed that she treated his elderly mother, Chief Mrs. Adaeze, with a warmth and patience that his own fiancée never bothered to show. He noticed that when his mother fell briefly ill, it was Amara, not Cynthia, who stayed up through the night, preparing herbal teas and warm compresses without being asked. One evening, Emeka came home early and found Amara in the kitchen, quietly crying while dicing onions. A video paused on her phone screen. He glanced at it before she could hide it, a video of a small boy blowing out birthday candles alone, his aunt clapping beside him, his mother's face visible only through a video call propped against a cup. "Who is that?" Emeka asked gently. Startled, Amara wiped her face quickly. "My son, sir, Kelechi. Today is his 6th birthday. I was not able to be there." For the first time since he'd known her, Emeka saw not a housemaid, not an employee, but a mother, carrying a weight most people in his social circle could never imagine. That night, he transferred a bonus into her account, quietly, without telling Cynthia, and arranged for Kelechi to be brought to Lagos to stay with his mother, a decision that would change the entire trajectory of the story, and one Cynthia would soon discover in the worst possible way. The arrival of one small boy in that mansion would set off a chain of events nobody could have predicted, least of all Cynthia. Don't go anywhere. Kelechi arrived in Lagos 2 weeks later, wide-eyed and clutching a small nylon bag containing his entire life's possessions. Amara wept the moment she saw him step out of the car, scooping him into her arms in the mansion's driveway as staff members watched, some smiling, some whispering. Chief Mrs. Adaeze, Emeka's mother, took an immediate liking to the boy. Confined more and more to the house due to her arthritis, she found in Kelechi a lively companion, someone to teach proverbs to, someone to tell old village stories to, someone whose laughter filled rooms that had grown too quiet since her husband's passing years before. "This child has an old soul," she told Emeka one afternoon, watching Kelechi help her water her prized hibiscus plants. "Do you know," he asked me, "why rich people build such big houses when they clearly don't have enough people to fill them?" Emeka laughed, but the words stayed with him. Cynthia, however, was furious. She saw the boy's presence as an unacceptable blurring of lines. The housemaid's family, now living under the same roof as her future husband's family, treated, in her eyes, with far too much familiarity. "This is not an orphanage," she snapped at Emeka one night. "First it was extra salary. Now her son is living here, feeding here, being spoiled by your mother. What is happening in this house, Emeka?" "He is a child, Cynthia," Emeka replied evenly. "And my mother has never been happier." "And what about how I feel?" Cynthia shot back. Emeka studied her for a long moment, a moment that, in hindsight, was the true beginning of the end of their engagement, though neither of them recognized it yet. "When was the last time you asked how I feel?" he asked quietly, before walking away. That question haunted Cynthia more than she let on, because the truth was, Cynthia's entire relationship with Emeka had never been built on genuine feeling in the way he assumed. It had been built on strategy, a strategy that stretched back further than anyone in that mansion could imagine, tied to a decades-old business betrayal that had destroyed her father's fortune and, some would later whisper, driven him to an early grave. Cynthia had never told Emeka the real reason her family's oil business had collapsed 15 years earlier. She had never told him whose signature was on the fraudulent contracts that ruined her father. And she certainly had never told him that the surname on that contract was Aniekwe, his own late father's name. A secret 15 years old was about to collide with a present-day love story, and nobody in that house was ready for what it would reveal. Stay tuned. As weeks turned into months, Emeka found himself, almost against his own will, gravitating toward the quiet corner of the house where Amara worked. He would linger in the kitchen longer than necessary. He would ask about Kelechi's schoolwork. He began noticing that his own laughter, genuine, easy laughter, only seemed to surface anymore in her presence. Amara fought her own feelings fiercely. She reminded herself daily of her position, of the engagement ring on Cynthia's finger, of the impossible gap between a banana island billionaire and a village widow. She busied herself with work, avoided long conversations, and prayed, quite literally, for Emeka to stop looking at her the way he sometimes did. But Cynthia noticed everything, and rather than confronting Emeka directly, she turned her frustration entirely onto Amara, escalating from cruel words to outright sabotage. It began with small things. Amara's meager savings mysteriously misplaced from a drawer, later found in Cynthia's purse, and blamed on a misunderstanding. Then it became bigger. Cynthia accused Amara of stealing an expensive wristwatch belonging to Emeka's late father, a watch that, unbeknownst to the household, Cynthia herself had quietly pawned months earlier to cover a personal debt she was too proud to admit to. The accusation exploded into a full household scandal. Emeka, torn between his fiancée and his growing trust in Amara, ordered a full search of the staff quarters. Nothing was found, of course, but the humiliation of the search, of every one of her few possessions being turned over in front of other staff, broke something in Amara. That night, she packed her bag. "I cannot continue to be blamed for things I did not do," she told Chief Mrs. Adaeze, tears streaming freely. "I love working here. I love how you have treated Kelechi like your own grandson. But I cannot let my son grow up watching his mother be treated like a criminal in a house where she works honestly." Chief Mrs. Adaeze, a woman who had survived her own share of hardship as a young bride decades earlier, took Amara's hands in hers. "Stay one more week," she said gently. "Let me handle this in my own way. An old woman still has some power left in this house." Reluctantly, Amara agreed. It was a decision that would place her directly at the center of the storm about to break loose. One more week. That's all it would take for the entire foundation of that household to come crashing down, and for a truth 15 years buried to finally surface. Keep watching. True to her word, Chief Mrs. Adaeze began quietly investigating the missing watch scandal herself, using connections and instincts sharpened over decades of navigating Lagos high society. Within days, she discovered, through a pawn shop receipt accidentally left in an old handbag, that Cynthia herself had sold the watch nearly 4 months earlier. But that was not the discovery that changed everything. While going through old family documents to confirm the watch's origin and value, Chief Mrs. Adaeze stumbled upon a manila folder her late husband had kept locked away. Decades-old business records from his early years building the family company. Among them was a contract bearing a name that made her blood run cold, Bello Petroleum Services, and beneath it, a signature, forged, she now realized, examining it with new eyes, that had been used to seize control of a smaller company and push its owner, a man named Chief Augustine Bello, into bankruptcy and, eventually, an early grave from the stress of it all. Chief Augustine Bello, Cynthia's father. The pieces assembled themselves with sickening clarity. Cynthia had not fallen in love with Emeka by accident. All those years ago, at a Lagos business mixer, she had engineered the meeting. Her engagement was never simply romantic ambition. It was 15 years of carefully patient revenge. A plan to marry into the very family that had destroyed hers, gain control of assets and inheritance, and eventually dismantle the Aniekwe empire from the inside, the same way it had been used to dismantle her father's. The maid's arrival, and Emeka's growing affection for her, had never been part of Cynthia's careful plan, and it was quickly becoming the one variable she could not control. Chief Mrs. Adaeze sat with this knowledge alone for 2 full days, wrestling with how, and whether, to reveal it. Revealing it meant reopening old wounds about her late husband's business practices. It meant potentially destroying her son's upcoming, publicly anticipated wedding in front of all of Lagos society. But staying silent meant allowing her son to marry a woman whose love was, at its very foundation, an elaborate act of vengeance. She decided the truth needed to come out, but not from her. She needed proof strong enough that no one, especially Cynthia's powerful society allies, could dismiss it as an old woman's jealous meddling. And so, without telling anyone her true intentions, she asked Amara for a favor that would place the quiet housemaid directly in the eye of the coming storm, to help her carefully search through Cynthia's private office at the mansion for further evidence, the very next morning before Cynthia woke. Amara had spent months trying to stay invisible in that house. That plan was about to fail spectacularly. Don't miss what happens next. The next morning, while searching through a locked drawer in Cynthia's private office at Chief Mrs. Adaeze's careful direction, Amara found something far more damning than old family documents. A folder of recent bank transfers, the invoices, and falsified vendor contracts revealing that Cynthia had, for over a year, been quietly siphoning millions of naira from Emeka's construction company through a shell vendor account, in partnership with Emeka's own cousin and company co-director, Richard Aniekwe, a man Emeka trusted completely. The scheme was elegant in its cruelty. Inflate vendor invoices for supposed construction materials, funnel the difference into offshore accounts, and slowly bleed the company while positioning Cynthia and Richard to eventually seize controlling shares, once Emeka, distracted by wedding planning and expansion projects, was least paying attention. Before Amara could gather the documents to bring to Chief Mrs. Adaeze, the office door swung open. Cynthia stood frozen in the doorway, her morning coffee slipping from her hand and shattering on the marble floor. "What?" Cynthia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you think you are doing in my office?" Amara, documents still in hand, had no chance to explain before Cynthia lunged forward, snatching at the papers, screaming for security, her carefully composed high society mask completely shattering into raw, cornered fury. "Thief! She is a thief! Call security! She has been stealing from this house all along!" Within minutes, the entire household had gathered. Staff, security, and finally, Emeka himself, rushing down the grand staircase, still adjusting his shirt, having been woken by the commotion. "She was in my office, going through my private things," Cynthia shrieked, pointing an accusing finger. "I told you, Emeka. I told you there was something wrong with this girl since the day she arrived. Now she's caught red-handed, and you still want to protect her." Amara stood in silence, documents clutched to her chest, humiliation and fear washing over her in waves. She could try to explain, but who would believe the housemaid's word against the fiancé's, in front of an entire household? It was in that exact moment of unbearable tension that Chief Mrs. Adaeze descended the staircase slowly, deliberately, a folder of her own tucked beneath her arm. "She was in that office," the elderly woman said calmly, silencing the room with the sheer weight of her presence. "Because I sent her there." Every head turned. "Mama?" Emeka asked, stunned. Chief Mrs. Adaeze looked directly at Cynthia. "Perhaps," she said. "It's time everyone in this room learned exactly why." Everything the household believed about this engagement was about to unravel in front of everyone. But the biggest twist of all was still coming, and it would blindside even Chief Mrs. Adaeze herself. Keep watching. What followed was one of the most explosive confrontations that Grand Mansion had ever witnessed. Chief Mrs. Adaeze laid out the evidence methodically, the forged contract from 15 years earlier that had destroyed Cynthia's father's oil business, and the recent embezzlement documents proving Cynthia and Richard's ongoing theft from Emeka's company. Emeka stood frozen, his world rearranging itself violently in real time. The woman he had planned to marry, the woman he had trusted with his family's name and fortune, had orchestrated their entire relationship as a 15-year act of calculated revenge. "Is this true?" he asked Cynthia, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of it?" Cynthia's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. "Do you know what your father did to mine?" she screamed, years of buried rage spilling out. "He signed a contract that stole everything my family built." "My father died broken, Emeka. Broken and humiliated, while your family built palaces on the money you stole from us. You think I planned all this out of nowhere? I planned it because it was owed to me. So all of it," Emeka said slowly, "the years together, was never real?" Here is where the story took its sharpest turn, the twist nobody watching could have predicted. Cynthia's face, contorted with years of rage, suddenly crumbled, not into further anger, but into something raw and broken. "It started as revenge," she admitted, voice shaking. "But somewhere along the way, I don't know when, it stopped being only that. And then I watched you fall for the maid, right in front of me, the same way I had already fallen for you despite everything, and I could not stand it. I destroyed myself trying to destroy you, Emeka. And in the end, I don't even know which version of me was ever real. It was, in its own tragic way, the truth. Cynthia had entered the relationship as a weapon and had, somewhere in those 15 years, genuinely fallen in love with the very man she meant to ruin, a fact that made her jealousy of Amara and her cruelty toward her not simply strategic, but deeply, painfully personal. But sympathy for Cynthia's tragic contradictions did not erase the financial devastation she and Richard had orchestrated. Within the hour, Emeka's lawyers were on the phone. Security had detained Richard at the office before he could flee the country, and news of the shattered engagement began leaking, inevitably, into Lagos social media circles. By nightfall, the story had a hashtag, Lekki wedding scandal, though the location was actually Banana Island. Lagos gossip blogs rarely let facts slow down a good headline. Amara, meanwhile, stood quietly to the side through all of it, still holding Kelechi's hand, wondering, with a sinking heart, whether her presence in that house had caused more destruction than good, and whether she and her son now had any place left in it at all. The scandal was over. But the hardest conversation of the entire story, the one between Emeka and Amara, hadn't even happened yet. Stay with us for the final act. In the days following the scandal's collapse, Emeka retreated into himself, overwhelmed by betrayal, business damage control, and the dizzying realization of how close he had come to marrying someone whose foundation with him had been built on a lie stretching back 15 years. Amara, meanwhile, quietly began preparing to leave. With the household in chaos and her name unfairly tangled into the early hours of the scandal, she felt certain her presence would only complicate an already fractured family. "I think it's best Kelechi and I go home," she told Chief Mrs. Adaeze one evening, folding the last of her clothes into her worn travel bag. "Sit down, my daughter," the older woman said firmly. When Amara hesitated, she added, more gently, "Please." Amara sat. "Do you know," Chief Mrs. Adaeze began, "that in 15 years, Cynthia never once, not a single time, sat with me the way you have, reading me my medication schedule, rubbing shea butter into these tired old hands, listening to my stories about my husband, as though they actually mattered to you. You never asked me for anything, Amara. Not once. And in a house like mine, where everyone wants something, that made you the only person I ever fully trusted." Before Amara could respond, the study door opened and Emeka stepped in, looking, for the first time since she'd met him, genuinely uncertain of himself. "I heard you're leaving," he said quietly. "I think it's best, sir," Amara replied, standing. "Please, stop calling me sir," Emeka said, a small, tired smile breaking through his exhaustion. "You never really did, you know, not in the way that mattered." He stepped closer. "Amara, I spent my whole adult life, building an image of what my life was supposed to look like. The right woman, the right wedding, the right partnership for the right business reasons. And in trying to build that image, I almost married someone who never truly loved me, while ignoring the one person in my own house who showed me, every single day, without asking for anything in return, what real character looks like." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She fought hard to hold back. "Emeka, I am a village girl who came here to clean your floors. People will talk. Your family's name." "My family's name," Emeka interrupted gently, "survived a scandal invented by a woman raised in this very society. I think it can survive falling in love with a woman who has more honor in her little finger than most of Lagos society combined." Chief Mrs. Adaeze, watching from her chair, dabbed quietly at her own eyes. "Kelechi already calls me grandma," she said, laughing through tears. It would be a shame to make the boy a liar now, but even in this moment of hope, one final twist waited in the wings. A reveal that would tie Amara's entire tragic past directly back to the very family she had just been welcomed into. 2 weeks later, as Emeka and Amara sat together going through old family photographs to help Chief Mrs. Adaeze organize a private album, a faded photograph slipped out from between 2 pages, a group photo from a company event nearly 20 years earlier. Amara stared at it, her breath catching. That's my father," she whispered, pointing to a young man standing at the edge of the group, smiling, in a security guard's uniform. Chief Mrs. Adaeze leaned in, adjusting her glasses, and went pale. "Emeka," she said slowly, "your father's first construction site. Before we had real money, before the company grew. Do you remember the name of the young security guard who saved your father's life during that building collapse in '99? The one who pulled him out from under the scaffolding and was crushed doing it, but survived. Emeka shook his head slowly. I was a child. I don't remember details. Only that Papa always said he owed his life to a nameless guard he could never properly repay, because the man disappeared from the city right after, taking a payout and moving back to his village to heal. His name, Chief Mrs. Adaeze said, tapping the photograph, was written on the back of every photo from that year. Let me see. She turned the photo over with trembling hands. Faded ink read, Chukwu Okonkwo, Site Security, 1999. Amara's hand flew to her mouth. Chukwu Okonkwo was my father's name. The room fell into stunned silence. It meant that, decades before Amara ever set foot in that mansion as a housemaid, her own father had saved the life of Emeka's father during a construction accident, an act of quiet heroism that had gone unrepaid and unacknowledged for over 20 years, buried by time, distance, and a payout that was never enough to properly thank a man who had risked everything for a stranger's family. Fate, it turned out, had connected these two families long before either Emeka or Amara had ever met. Not through a random job posting, not by coincidence alone, but through a debt of honor that had waited 2 decades to be recognized. Your father, Emeka said, voice thick with emotion, gave my father a second chance at life. And somehow, without either of us knowing it, his daughter walked back into ours and gave me a second chance at understanding what love was actually supposed to look like. What began as a story of humiliation ended as a story of destiny, proving that some debts and some loves find their way home, no matter how long the road. The wedding was small, deliberately so. No gossip blogs, no forced society smiles, just family, real friends, and a beaming 6-year-old boy serving as ring bearer, walking proudly beside the grandmother who now called him her own. Cynthia, following months of restitution agreements and quiet legal settlements, relocated abroad to start over, her fate left unresolved, but her role in the story complete. A reminder that revenge, however justified its roots, rarely builds anything that lasts. Amara's mother, finally stabilized after months of proper treatment, funded quietly by Emeka, long before the wedding was ever announced, sat in the front row in her best ankara, weeping proudly through the entire ceremony. And as Emeka slipped a ring onto Amara's finger in front of the family that had once treated her as invisible, Chief Mrs. Adaeze leaned toward a nearby cousin and whispered, loud enough for several rows to hear, "You see, I told all of you. The right daughter-in-law was cleaning our floors the whole time. We were just too blind and too proud to notice. Be honest. Was Cynthia the real villain here, or just a broken woman who never got a fair shot? Drop your verdict in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And subscribe. You'll want to see who's right when the next story drops."